The simplest case is where there are just two firms with identical costs, product and demand. Now, they are both considering which two alternative prices to change. So, well, let's consider these two firms to be Pepsi and Coca-Cola. So let's look at this table. We have Coke and Pepsi here. Well, let's assume that both firms are charging $2 right now for the drinks. So they belong to the box over here. They are each making a profit of $10 million, giving a total industry profit of $20 million. Now let's assume that they are both independently of each other, considering reducing their price to $1.80. Now first, they must take into account what their rivals might do and how this might affect them. Let's consider Pepsi. In our example, we assume that there are just two things that they account for, whether Coke might do or might not do. Either Coke will cut its price to $1.80 as well, or it could leave its price as $2. Now, if Pepsi remains at $2, but Coke drops to $1.80, Pepsi will suffer a huge loss, making only $5 million. Coke, due to lower price, will be able to earn a much higher revenue, hence making $12 million. If Pepsi lowers to $1.80 but Coke remains at $2, the same thing, though this time Pepsi gets a higher revenue instead. Now, if both of them lowers to $1.80, they both earn less and earn only $8 million each. What should Pepsi do then? Well, one alternative is to consider the cautious approach and think about the worst thing that a rival can do. And your job is to minimize this. So if Pepsi kept its price at $2, the worst thing that can happen to Pepsi is if its rival Coke cut its price, and this is shown at the cell on the lower left-hand corner. Pepsi then only earns $5 million. However, if Pepsi cuts the price to $1.80, the worst thing can happen to Pepsi is if Coke cuts as well, which makes Pepsi accept a revenue of $8 million. So to minimize its losses, Pepsi chooses the $8 million and chooses to lower its price to $1.80. We can make the same argument for Coke. So Coke chooses to minimize its loss as well and settles for $1.80. Then both of them will end up in the lower right-hand box, which allows each of them to earn $8 million. This is called the Maxi Min strategy, maximizing the minimum revenue. Now, another way to go about is to go for the optimistic approach. This is called the Maxi Max approach, and it assumes your rivals will act in a way most favorable to you. In this case, it means that Pepsi will cut its price because Pepsi will assume that Coke keeps the price the same. And in this case, the gain for Pepsi will be 12. But Coke will be considering this as well, and it will cut its price as well. So in this case, well, both still end up at the bottom right-hand corner cell. So when both strategies leads to the same outcome, we call this a dominant strategy game, and this equilibrium is called a Nash equilibrium. But it doesn't matter because it leads on into our next idea, which is called a prisoner's dilemma.